would you still speak the truth if it cost you everything? That's not some game show question. It's reality. Charlie Kirk was gunned down because of his convictions. A young woman never made it home because a repeat offender stabbed her to death. And recently, young children were shot while in church. Those aren't abstract headlines. They're reminders that we live in this scary culture where convictions can have consequences. But Andrew Clavin put it perfectly. You'd be a fool to not be afraid of these people, but you'd be an even bigger fool to give in to your fear. So yes, our fear is real. But imagine these stories. A city under siege, a young woman hiding spies on her roof, or a queen whispering truth that could get her killed. These aren't legends. They actually happened, and they show us what courage can look like. Hi, I'm Tracy, and when I'm fearful, I go back to the Bible. Because this whole fear thing, it's actually a big deal to God. It's the single most often repeated instruction in all of Scripture. Fear not. Why? Well, I don't know the mind of God, but I think it's because it shrinks us, it's corrosive, and it keeps us from living the meaningful, impactful life He wants for us. But the Bible also has these incredible stories of women who stared fear in the face and didn't let it overcome them. Let's talk about a few of them. First up is Rahab. She lived in Jericho, this fortress city with walls so thick it made the city seem untouchable. But then 2 spies slipped inside, and Rahab faced a decision that could have ended her life. Rahab wasn't some respected leader. In fact, she was a prostitute. The king's soldiers were already hunting for the spies, and honestly, the safe move would have just been to hand them over. After all, to hide them would have been treason and meant execution. But Rahab had heard the story about Israel's God, and she decided to trust him. She hid the spies under some flax on her roof while the soldiers were pounding on nearby doors. When they got to her house, she lied to the soldiers and sent them the wrong way. Then she lowered the spies down the wall with nothing but a rope. In return, the spies promised Rahab that when Jericho fell, and it did, that her whole family would be spared. And that's exactly how it went down. Courage isn't about being fearless. It's about moving forward when everything in you is telling you to play it safe. Rahab didn't have power or a title. She didn't even have a good reputation, but she had faith. And that changed everything. We see that same kind of courage today. It's doing the hard, countercultural thing instead of taking the easy road. Think of the mom staying at home and deciding not to let the culture raise her kids. I don't know, she limits screen time, she teaches discipline, and she stands firm when everybody else is saying, it just doesn't matter. On the outside, it looks small, but just like Rahab, her courage is impacting the next generation. Rahab chose private, dangerous mercy. Let's fast forward a couple hundred years and talk about a woman named Jael. Israel was stuck in fear, and the enemy's army had 900 iron chariots. Think like our modern-day tanks. And it made them feel unbeatable. Resistance seemed pointless. But Israel went to war, led by another woman, I might add, and actually won. So the leader of the enemy army, this guy named Sisera, jumped out of his iron chariot and fled on foot, straight into the tent of a woman named Jael. She had no soldiers, no weapons, just her household tools. He thought he'd found safety. Jael gave him milk and a warm blanket. So the scene is really kind of eerie. This predator has come into her tent, but he's let his guard down. I think she must have felt really vulnerable. I mean, showing him hospitality, but here he was in her private space. Honestly, she could have frozen. She could have just hoped that if she was kind enough and nice enough, maybe he would show mercy to her family. Instead, when he fell asleep, she reached for a tent peg, something she used every day to pitch her family's tent. She knew exactly how to handle it, and she drove it straight through his head. Decisive, brutal, final, but it ended the threat. And that's what it looks like to have both conviction and courage, things we need today too. Jael's courage wasn't public, it was private, it was in her own home. And that matters. Today it's the same thing. The courage may mean, do you stay quiet or are you willing to act with conviction? I mean, this is real. In the UK, people have been arrested for silently praying outside abortion clinics. Did you get that? Silently praying. In Finland, a politician had to stand trial for only quoting scripture. And new speech laws across the European Union mean that you can be arrested for something you just say online. Even here in the US, the pressure is real. We've all heard about the HR memo that basically tells you to check your convictions at the door. Or we've heard about the college student who gets shouted down for just saying what they believe. believe. Just to be clear, we are not called to pick up tent pegs or resort to violence, but we are called to pick up our courage. Faith often demands that we act when fear is whispering in our ear, just stay quiet. Jael's story reminds us that sometimes courage is needed in the quiet, private spaces of life. But our next story, Esther, tells us what happens when courage is needed on a national scale. Esther's courage wasn't just about her own life, but about saving her entire people. So now let's jump ahead to the Persian Empire. This young Jewish woman named Esther suddenly finds herself the queen, but it's not some fairy tale romance. In fact, the king got rid of the last queen in this fit he had of rage and pride. And then he basically has this nationwide beauty contest that Esther wins. So suddenly, she finds herself in the palace with all this power and access she never dreamed of. At first, no one knew she was Jewish, but then comes the crisis. The king's top advisor, this guy named Haman, devises this scheme to wipe out the entire Jewish people. Suddenly, Esther's hidden identity wasn't just her business, but it meant life or death for an entire nation. But here's the deal. In Persian, even the queen couldn't just walk in and talk to the king. To approach the king uninvited was literally a death sentence unless he decided to extend the golden scepter. So Esther was terrified, but she fasted and prayed for 3 days and then ultimately said, "If I perish, I perish." She trembled, but she stepped forward anyway. She put on her royal robes, she got all glowed up, as we say, and she stepped into that throne room and waited. The king extended the scepter, and her life was saved. From that point, Esther used strategy. She invited the king and Haman to a banquet, and then a second banquet. She waited for the moment when her words would have the exact right impact. And at that second banquet, she revealed to the king her actual identity and Haman's plot. The whole thing turned on a dime. Haman was executed, and the Jewish people were saved. Esther never lifted a sword. Her weapons were wisdom, timing, influence, and most of all, courage. If you've ever felt your heart race before you posted something about your faith online, or maybe you stayed quiet at work when you knew speaking up might cost you, then you've tasted just this little shadow of the fear Esther had. For us, the cost might be embarrassment or job security or maybe our reputation. For Esther, it was life and death. The scale is different, but the fear is the same. It's the fear of being known for what you actually believe. Esther's story tells us that courage isn't waiting until you feel safe. It's stepping up when you want to stay silent, when you realize that actually staying silent will cost you more. But before we talk about what these stories mean for us and our modern lives, if this is resonating with you, will you hit like and subscribe? It helps more people find the show, and it helps me keep creating content like this. Okay, so let's talk. So what do we do with these ancient stories, and how do they help us live in our modern world? Here are my 5 takeaways. First, take action in spite of the fear. You don't wait to feel unafraid. You move through the fear. You don't obey it, and you don't give in to it. Rahab could have been killed for hiding those spies, but she acted anyway and trusted God. Esther fasted, prayed, and then said, "If I die, I die," before walking right into that throne room. Yes, they were afraid, but they acted anyway. Next, don't focus on the fear. Focus on God. Fear always tries to take center stage. Jael wasn't a soldier. She was just a woman in her tent. And yet she faced the enemy commander without letting herself get frozen by fear. She trusted God's deliverance and acted. You don't find courage by endlessly repeating worst-case scenarios to yourself. You find courage by focusing your eyes on the God who's always with you. Next, use what you have right where you are. Rahab had flax stalks and a rope. Jael had a tent peg. Esther had beauty and access. None of them had perfect resources. They just used what God had already put in their hands. And discernment is often the bravest choice. Courage isn't always about charging ahead or posting before you think. Sometimes it's choosing patience and timing and even wisdom. Esther didn't burst into the king's chamber with her list of demands. She waited, she was strategic, and she spoke when the time was right. That's discernment. And most importantly, trust God with the outcome. None of these women had a guarantee of success, but they acted anyway. That's exactly what courage is. It's obedience when the outcome isn't certain. Your job, my job, is to step forward in faith. God's job is the outcome. Rahab, Jael, Esther, none of them had perfect resources, and they certainly didn't have a guaranteed outcome. But they simply refused to freeze. They were ordinary women, but they served an extraordinary God, and that's all it takes. Courage takes many forms: a rope lowered out a window at night, a tent peg in a steady hand, or a beautiful woman stepping into a dangerous room. Different acts, same faith. But these stories aren't just old relics. They're actually the grammar for how we make change today. The world needs you. It needs your stubborn, steady fire that refuses to be shut up. It also needs your wisdom, your clear, calm mind that decides when to speak and when to act. You are not incidental to this moment. You were placed here for a purpose. So, do the small, costly thing today. Speak when silence costs too much. Use what you have. Trust even when you don't know the outcome. Walk forward, not because you're unafraid, but because you're resolved. Be strong. Take courage and act anyway.